Do you think addiction will increase, decrease, or remain the same in the next 10 years?
Well, I'd rather talk about humility and what people think humility is.
Well, I think this is going to turn into a counter group. Okay.
Jeff, what if we introduce ourselves so people can be reminded who we are? Yeah.
Okay, do you want to start?
All right, okay. Well, you probably don't know me. I haven't spoken yet. My name is Linda Mercadante. I'm professor of theology at the Methodist Theological School in Ohio, and I'll be speaking tomorrow.
My name's Stanton Peel, and I'm unemployed. I'm the most famous unemployed addiction expert in the world.
I'm Alan Marlatt. I still have a job at the University of Washington in Seattle, but I'm from Vancouver, and it's great to be back.
Hi, I'm Gary Nixon, and I'm a transpersonal psychologist in the Wilbur Almas camp, and I'm the coordinator of addictions counseling program at the University of Lethbridge.
How far are you from becoming a woman now?
I'm going to go on.
I think that's a projection.
Yeah.
Transpersonal. It means, hopefully so, beyond ego, transcending the ego, which is sometimes a very difficult process when you've sold 7 books and you lecture around the world and just have to show up and people recognize you.
I'm going to follow this. My name is Scott Tonigan. Some of you attended the presentation earlier. Thank you very much. And I am a researcher at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque.
Hello, my name is Ken Hart. I'm a psychology professor at the University of Windsor, Windsor, Ontario, Canada. I'm very happy to be here. Do research on degree of involvement in Alcoholics Anonymous, following the steps, endorsement of AA beliefs, participation in AA practices, and its relationship to both abstinence and this thing called sobriety. And I'm really interested in what people here think is the difference between abstinence and sobriety, and I was hoping that we could have a dialogue around that.
Okay, well, why don't we, we've got a few ideas on the table here. I'm thinking this is a conference on addiction, meaning, and spirituality. So I'm just wondering, just to get the ball rolling, if we could, like some thoughts on that. Is that acceptable? Yeah, who would like to? Give it to her.
Just a quick statement is Dr. Gogden, I believe in Utah, has a study that she titled, "What's God Got to Do with It?" And it's looking at adolescent treatment and substance abusers. And I mention that because I've been thinking, what's God got to do with it? As, basically all along for many years have thought that we all understood what it was. But really, we have really what we call a simultaneous equation, where we have God on one side and we have it. And what I've been really become very clear in this conference is that the it part, there's not agreement. As a substance abuse treatment researcher, it means a targeted behavior. It does not mean this larger constellation of cognitions and affect that I think ought to be considered. And so I can see that one thing that I'm going to take home to Albuquerque is an appreciation of much more broadly defining what we regard as treatment outcome or sometimes self-change outcome. And I'm very appreciative to be at this conference for that reason.
Something that I've been preoccupied with a lot lately is the relationship, this is an obvious one, between trauma and addiction. And just working with students, working with clients, and seeing that the addiction is like a coping mechanism, but if we want to really work through and work with people, we have to get underneath and get at those core structures, because people can be left with a deep feeling of I'm not okay, or I don't belong, and those are powerful mechanisms that guide us. And so I think as therapists and clinicians, we need to be able to dive in and work holistically and intensively and not be swept away by the rhetoric of solution-focused motivational interviewing. Those are powerful tools, but we also have to do deep holistic work, both ourselves and with our clients, with treatment centers, and that sort of thing. I know this can be a controversy because of the movement in the field and people here, even at this table, but I see that as a huge controversy. But myself, I am for example, Ken Wilber has said that, we live in a society, geez, I'm starting to sound like someone that's going a little rant. Okay, well, there you go. Ken Wilber has used this term flatland. And addictions is almost a flatland technique of staying in surface structures. And I think as a North American society, we have to be able to embrace the need for more in-depth, more sacred, and more intense culture, or else we'll be falling the way of the addictive pathways. And that's enough for now.
Well, I just listened to Scott's talk, and the issue around Alcoholics Anonymous and the higher power and the mediating role of spirituality, and it doesn't look like it's all that strong in some ways, and even atheists and so forth can get a lot out of going to AA. So really what's going on, maybe more just sharing your problems with other people who have the same problem, and there's a real sense of social support, and in a way that's a kind of a spiritual, or at least beyond the individual kind of thing.
Interdependence?
Interdependence, because we could call it that. So that would suggest that other groups like Smart Recovery that don't involve higher powers could have the same general effects, because it's still many people sharing their same problems and getting help, not from a higher power, but just from the collective sense of who's there.
It's a good point. And I was talking with Ken last night that I'm beginning to think of the curative aspects of 12-step programs is that it enhances attachment at many levels, with the individual, the social support, and even through spirituality, it's a notion of attachment with something else beyond oneself. But that doesn't preclude that spiritual attachment may not be the active ingredient that really drives the benefit. It may be indeed the fellowship and the mutual interaction. Yeah.
One thing that isn't clear, but I think we're assuming it is, and I'm not saying this to make it more problematic, is that I don't think there's agreement on what spirituality is. And is there a major distinction between being religious and being spiritual? There's kind of an assumption that we know what that means, but from my perspective, we really don't know the answers to those questions. And I think if you ask Stanton Peele, he'd probably say we have the same confusion over the idea of addiction, so not everything is as settled as we would like it to be.
Just another him.
What about just having a place to go where there are a lot of people that don't drink? Does that?
In fact, in Europe, they have what they call drinking clubs, which are really abstinence-based clubs, and they have demonstrated evidence.
They have that social network therapy, which is how are you going to figure out how to find some people to hang out with who don't drink as much as the ones you used to hang out with? And AA provides that.
It does, or it seems to. I think the finding that I'm intrigued with is that, as you know, the disaffiliation, the dropout is so high that it seems that one role of spirituality may be a shared ideology that holds one in. Now, that can be viewed from several different perspectives as coercive versus supportive. But it seems that it's a shared ideology that keeps one engaged in those behaviors and around the social network.
Oh, I was thinking about what you said before about spirituality being attachment to something outside yourself. But within the world of religion, that can also be called idolatry.
Right.
So, yeah. I mean, you have to be careful what you are attaching yourself to. Yeah.
Just on the topic of attachment, I've been reading this book. I was actually surprised that there was a book written in 1980 by James Crimbaugh called Logotherapy, New Help for Problem Drinkers. Anybody who's interested in existential models and logotherapy might want to take a look at that. And he talks about how the model of people drinking to relieve themselves from negative affect has a complement. People often drink to gain positive affect, or in this case, a sense of connectedness, a sense of overcoming one's sense of alienation from others. People drink to overcome a sense of alienation from one's own self, from one's place, sense of alienation from one's place in the cosmos. And in the initial stages of drinking, at least, people can get a counterfeit sense of spiritual transcendence, that is, transcending one's ego and connecting with others around them and feeling part of instead of apart from. And so this idea of attachment, I think, can be easily connected to people who are interested in gaining more meaning through drinking. It's a misdirected kind of way to gain a sense of spiritual transcendence, and I believe that this is what Carl Jung said to Bill Wilson in some early correspondence they had. And at that time, he proposed the ancient formula, which has been around for thousands of years, spiritus contra spiritum. It takes the spirit of God, higher power, supreme being, some transcendent being to overcome the spirit of alcohol. And the assumption is that we all have a need for meaning, and that some people used alcohol to derive this sense of meaning and place and connection, and that this should be, and that this is somehow counterfeit, and it should be replaced with something that you might consider a little more authentic. So I think that maybe connecting, with a sense of authentic self, attachment to others, and not feeling alienated or attached from the cosmos might fit in with what Dr. Tongden is proposing.
Well, interesting you mentioned Carl Jung, of course, because he had worked with Roland H., who was a friend of Bill Wilson's, and Roland H. had done psychotherapy with Carl Jung and was able to stop drinking, and then he went back to New York. He was a stockbroker like Bill Wilson and had a relapse and wrote to Carl Jung about whether he should go back to Zurich for more psychotherapy. And Carl Jung said in his famous letter, no. Many people with these kinds of problems, alcoholics, are like frustrated mystics looking for a spiritual experience, but they got it mixed up with the spirits in the bottle instead of a larger spiritual experience. And that what they needed to do was to find a spiritual kind of program to extend beyond psychotherapy. And but transpersonal therapy is such a kind of therapy, so the question is whether therapy can continue rather than having to say, no, you have to turn it over to some more organized religion.
I did a 2.5-hour clinical workshop this morning, and I thought to myself, have you ever done a lot of presenting and then got to a point, I think I've said enough now. And it was just about that point, and then he said, transpersonal therapy is a kind of therapy. So I immediately went, oh. So what was the actual question? I heard you say a kind of therapy, but what was your actual question?
Well, whether you have to go on, like Carl Jung said, into a more spiritual experience rather than therapy itself.
Okay. Oh, no, well, you were just talking about earlier, and I addressed it this morning. I see transpersonal therapy, and like Christina Groff wrote a book a number of years ago called The Thirst for Wholeness. And so on this stuff with Carl Jung, we're all on this quest for wholeness. And drinking and drugging and gambling can be our artificial McDonald's way to get wholeness cheap. And I think as therapists, we have to be able to teach our clients and ourselves to authentically embrace existence and go on a whole quest, on an authentic quest for wholeness, living all the levels up. And this is not an artificial New Age Quaking thing. if you look at, say, Wilbur's spectrum model of development with the 10 different levels, it's very intense work, working your way all through the different levels. And it involves not spiritual bypass, where you miss a bunch of levels and announce one day that you're an enlightened individual. It means going through the different social, ego identity, existential, and then getting to ego transcendence levels. But it may also mean that you realize you've split off from earlier in your life, and you may have had some huge trauma experiences, and you may have been abused, and you have to go back, because you may realize sometimes in life, in certain situations, like you have a powerful boss that reminds you of your dad, you're not there dealing with that person. And then what you do instead of dealing with that person, you go out and get drunk. And so I think really this is an invitation to take this quest for wholeness, this journey seriously and all the way up. And I know you got some of that with yourself, with your mindful meditation, that sort of thing. But I don't think we need to shy away from that. I think that's the golden, like that's where all the energy is. And what's interesting along with this too is there is shadow issues all the way up as well, in the sense of we always have to, as therapists and as clients, we always have to emerging shadow issues. Carl Jung talked about that. For example, in North America, we've had these gurus come over from India who's proclaimed ultimate enlightenment, but soon they're doing all the shadow stuff that show obviously they're in at some permanent state. And so life is difficult. It's an ongoing journey, which I think we have to know. Everything's in process. And so, well, there's no, like, it's actually a shame that I can't sit here and say I'm an expert. Because, for example, death. Am I an expert in front of death? I don't think so. Maybe I've not been on the journey and that sort of thing. So I think we're all involved in this journey of figuring this all out and trying to work very intensely on it, and then maybe using our role model for other people, and then maybe someone challenges us or gives us some invitations for growth. So I see this addictions journey very holistically, and it's exciting because addictions can be mind, body, spirit, like mental health. They don't allow the spiritual component because the way other person's about to go schizophrenic. So I think it's a very exciting opportunity, and it's sort of invitation for us to really plunge into that journey.
Perhaps one thing maybe it's controversial to put on the table, because many of us have said it, and it's a tacit assumption, is that we all seek meaning. But what I'm thinking of is Maslow's work, where what they found out to our surprise is many people were very content with just having secured security. They did not feel compelled to go higher. And are we really talking about a small set of people? And for example, if we think of it on a horizontal level of attachments and a vertical level of needs and motivations, indeed, do people intuitively, intrinsically seek meaning? I mean, we obviously are a group that do, but is that true of the general substance abusing population? I don't know the answer.
Don't people always have like religions and things like that?
That's what I was going to say. Do you want to say it?
You go.
That's, I was going to say that's what the purpose of religion has always been all through culture and history, is to provide the answer to that question. What's the meaning of life and what's your purpose while you're here?
But church attendance is lower now than it ever has been in America. So, yeah.
Well, I'm just saying but when one type of religious experience doesn't work for people, another one comes up. And we might be in a transitional phase where it's being reconstructed. But that has been the purpose of religion, because it is a human need. But maybe some people are so busy with survival they haven't had time to reflect.
Right.
To the audience?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
With respect to whether there's some groups that seek meaning and some don't, I'm wondering whether alcoholics or people who may be abstinent now but did drink for a long period of time, whether there may be less aim or focus to seek need because of what's happened to the frontal lobes. And as the alcohol done damage to the frontal lobes where conscience is, do people live less spiritually? Are they less likely to follow through on steps 4 to 8 if they've had a lot of drinking that's affected the frontal lobes? What is the biochemical? That might be
think Alan knows more of cognitive impairment involvement, substance abuse than I certainly do.
It's a good question. I don't know.
Certainly, there is some research to suggest that greater participation
Have that large proportion of people who self-change and mature. But I as a researcher, get alarmed by the interplay between treatment and 12-step programs. For example, I've observed hundreds of meetings in different cities, and these are the two things I would bring up. One is you hear the word disease being spoken about in 12-step meetings, and that is not in the core literature. The alcohol dependence is not described as a disease. And I get concerned when the recovering alcohol or substance abusing dependent person who's involved in 12-step program sees helping others as prescribed in 12-step programs, calling them to professional treatment service, because then they are really resolving their own issues and deriving their own meaning by providing formal treatment to someone else who may or may not seek meaning in that way. And I think that's something that we really have to be careful about in this country.
What percentage of people that recover from alcoholism would you guess, do so through AA?
I don't know. I think
You're doing all this research and you don't know?
we don't know, because we know, unfortunately, the number of naturalistic studies, where it's just, like Linda Sobel's work or what have you, or the work we were talking about earlier about ARG, we really don't have much on the general population. I mean, I've heard estimates as high as 1 of 10 people in the United States will attend an AA meeting. Are they substance abusers or not? Are they curious or not? Are they going there to meet people and really don't even use alcohol? So it's very
Do you
hard.
have a guess or an idea of what percentage of people who attend AA are significantly helped by that? Attended at all? Who are
Of those who
exposed to it?
attend at all? I really don't. What I would say is...
God, you're the guy with all the data and you do fuck all.
Well, what's amazing to me is, and this we see, I think, as clinicians, is for those people who present to treatment, most of them have attended AA. And so you'd say they're AA failures. And yet, once they're in formal treatment, they go back, they, on their own, self-select to go back to AA, which is very curious to me, because most of us, if we try something that doesn't work, we try something else. But there's a significant proportion who will continually try that. I would guess if I was pressed on a proportion, and it's just kind of gut derived from looking at a lot of different studies and doing some, I would say about 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 5 who will at least initially attend will sustain that attendance for a year. 1 out of 5. And that is based on not just going to one meeting, but can you get them to sample different meetings so they can find where there's that group dynamic fit. I'd say 1 in 5, 1 in 6 will do that. At 10 years, and we talked about this before though, in a study that we ran for 10-year follow-up, only 3 people out of 226 retained complete abstinence for that period of time.
An area of interest for me, though, is this weird group of people who get into a chronic addiction phase, and then they go to AA for a few months, a year or so, but they don't abandon their recovery. They start to think, well, AA is a little narrow. And I call this group, I've got the Meta Recovery Bunch, and they see, well, I'm going to embrace what I've learned in the 12-step program, but I can take this further and make this a second phase of recovery. I don't have to say it was a mistake. In fact, but I can actually almost make this much more of an integrated recovery process, maybe from a psychosynthesis, here I'm talking as a therapist now, psychosynthesis perspective. Down the road, if you've been an addict, you have an addict self that initially in recovery, you had to say, that's bad, okay? But what does that addict self stand for? Taking risks, maybe being a little bit wild, being able to be free-flowing. So down the road, maybe as you've got a little bit of recovery time in, and AA is starting to squeeze upon you, you can say to yourself, well, I'm going to keep the spirit of AA, but I'm going to move it a little further. And I think Charlotte Castle had a book out on this, and it's sort of like a second stage recovery, but it's going into your fullness. And then what you're doing is you're actually sort of getting into your full humanness and honoring that path. And so it's not taking away from AA, but it's actually honoring AA, but taking the journey further up in life. But not enough literature has been out there because people that don't hang out in AA or drop out, sometimes are judged for that as losers, as quitters, and they don't have a pathway that maybe they're, for example, they may not even be the higher power type. They may be an Eastern person that likes sort of non-dual traditions. And so this higher power thing doesn't work for them. And so if we can get some of these other pathways teased out, I think we can have more impact on people who've initially attended 12-step meetings.
This is a good point. Lots of people have read this book, A Million Little Pieces by James Frey, the one that was on Oprah. And of course, he got into some trouble because he exaggerated certain things. But in his experience at Hazelton, which is a treatment center, he's very, can't accept the 12-step program. So he starts reading about Taoism and finding that for him works, because he's saying, look, it's always a decision. It's not a higher power. It's like my decision. So I think like in the mindfulness meditation, there's a good book, by the way, Mindful Recovery by Bean, B-I-E-N. And they're talking about why don't we make more alternative spiritual approaches available. So like from a consumer perspective, you could do an 8-fold path instead of the 12-step program. There's a book, Zen of Recovery. There's Taoism, and there's probably others that we still are finding out about. So just like there's no real evidence that any one treatment for alcohol or any of the other addiction programs works better than any other. Project Match, now Project Combine. Hey, pharmacotherapy does as well as the behavioral therapy. I mean, like, what's going on here, right? So the same, I would think, be true in spiritual approaches. So people really need to know that if they don't like this 12-step program, there are other approaches that may be of more interest, more helpfulness.
To follow up on that, I mean, how can we get the debate?
Logical language is people are very attached to religious language, and it gets people really worked up. But I see, it's interesting, I see the fundamental issue, and I talked about this in my presentation this morning, and I think it's in the 12-step. There's a big emphasis on overcoming psychic inflation in the big book. There's, in transpersonal psychology, it's overcoming narcissism and ego, total ego and self-aggrandizement. The Buddhist path is all about the movement to know self, transcending self. And so I think that's a power, Taoism is a lot like that. And so I think it's sort of our self-preoccupation as the fundamental to an addict's pathway. Addicts or people with addictions issues become very self-preoccupied. And be able to move beyond self-preoccupation in whatever term you call it is, I think is absolutely huge, and it's fundamental. That's just my little 2-second version of it. Any takers?
I just wondered if we're talking about the point of departure, and when we're looking at where we're starting from, how do we see the healthy person? And if the healthy person, if we look at
We do think a healthy person is, even, or a spiritual person. Okay. There's a lot of,
just another word, when I say spiritual, I guess I'm not talking religion, because I think we all have a different way of expressing our spirituality, our baseline, so I wasn't talking religion.
okay. Well, I thought you had said the World Health Organization and spirituality and all that is part of health. But we don't even agree on what a healthy person is, I think. I don't mean it in a confrontative way, but if you're talking about the non-ego self, or the self that transcends ego, someone else here would definitely talk about the person with the strong, very strong ego, or high self-esteem, or the self-sacrificing ego, whereas someone else would say self-sacrifice is unhealthy. So as a person who's in the field of religion, and I teach in an addiction treatment program too, I have the same questions you do, because I think we're not agreeing on a lot of terms. But I also come at the spiritual or religious thing from a different perspective, because I think you can't actually untie that ball of yarn as much as we try. But I'll talk about that tomorrow.
Perhaps to make it even more complicated. But that's what we do, right? We're scholars. Well, when you think about it, my experience in treatment programs, so this is a finite set of problematic drinkers, is that when you ask them, what is your treatment goal, a high proportion, 70-80%, say abstinence. They don't know that risk reduction is even an option. You know, they, through the popular media, through the prevalence of the 12-step model, the belief that abstinence is the only way to happiness, or the only way to successfully beat an addiction, is very enstamped. And I mean, we have literally asked clients at presentation for treatment, do you believe alcoholism is a disease or a bad habit? Most of them will indicate, high proportion, that it's a disease. Most will say that abstinence is the only answer to that. Now, when we think about that, we have a lot of good research that says risk reduction is a more appropriate strategy for people. Instead of saying that and trying to educate people, we try instead to develop motivational theories to move them into readiness to accept abstinence. You know, and so...
Though, it doesn't matter what we call it disease or not, people are still dying.
Right.
Families are still falling apart. Does the mean what is
Well, until you're led into a room one day and someone says, sit down, you have a terrible disease. So that has implications. Language has huge implications. So we have to be careful and talk openly about the language we use, because language has a whole huge marginalizing power. So we have to be very sensitive and see, can we actually use language that gets the message without increasing the shame in the person's belly? Because in many cases, by the time you've got huge addiction issues, you've got many shame issues. And I come from a place that's got two of the biggest First Nations reserves in Canada. And so you realize that if you were on the reserve, no employment opportunities, everybody assumes that if you're walking down the street in town that you must be up to something, you must be almost drunk. People, if you go apply for a job, even though you got the credentials, you won't even be looked at. So it becomes very important with the language that we use, because I was just talking, I don't know if he's here early on, we have to be careful, I think, and this relates back to your earlier comment about social, it was about institutions or social, what, World Health Organization? I think we have to stop only being individually focused. We have to be careful with our institutions and even around such things as, for example, harm reduction is very important. If I know I'm working on my drinking issues, and if I'm told I have a disease and I slip up, I'll say, well, I might as well go on a 3-week binge. I've screwed up anyways. But if I'm told, well, you know, you can expect you might have a slip here or two, it just is a chance to regain some momentum, use a harm reduction model. Hey, I might be able to, but we've all heard all this stuff before. But what I'm trying to also say, though, is that we also, spiral dynamics, I don't know if people are here familiar with spiral dynamics, and out of the people that were facilitators for apartheid. See, our addictions institutions and universities have to start getting on the bandwagon too, because in subtle ways, that's why I was upset about dialogue with experts. Who nominated us as experts? Are we making any sense up here? Last time I checked, we were just a bunch of human beings who happen to have a couple academic gigs. I see there's a question, so I'll stop there.
I had a question for, mostly directed for Dr. Gildish, I guess. I really enjoyed your talk, and when you had people raise their hand about how people quit smoking, you know, without any specific treatment, I thought was an interesting point that was well made. My question is...
What do you make of that?
What did I make of it? Well, maybe the difference is, empirically, you see many people that say that they were able to successfully find recovery or abstinence, but then they would attribute it to their faith. So it's kind of another aspect of the equation that's not really necessarily in the domain of the conference, but you know, people that will go to church say, well, I found faith, or I found through Buddhism, or through Christianity, or through those tend to be common faiths where we're at. But you don't often hear them empirically say, I just gave it up cold turkey. So I guess the question I have from you is how do you interpret that, or how do you interpret that phenomenon where you're looking at reproducible, testable science, and you have the realm of miracles where maybe a unique aspect happens for an individual that's difficult to study, and then you have kind of this, what I see is a sort of observation of it, empirically people saying, my faith or my spirituality helped me to overcome addiction, but then the challenge is how do you test that, how do you reproduce that, how do you prove that?
Do you think many of the people who quit smoking would have said it was their faith or spirituality that enabled them to quit?
Empirically, I don't hear that spoken often. So
I think the largest category is certainly children in that group. I think the largest category is children, having children, do you think?
why they quit smoking? Sure.
That's a reason, though, not a means, or not the cause.
What's the cause?
Well, you would probably say it was their own self-decision, their self-will, but someone else could say it was their faith that gave them the power to take care of their children's needs and use their children as a motivation.
I would say that, again, quite obviously, some sort of new comments is that somebody who's quit smoking, for instance, because they have children, they attach some meaning towards some endpoint of smoking that's not consistent with the meaning they have or vision they have for raising their children.
It's not just smokers that quit a lot on their own. There's been studies, the Sobels have done studies on self-quitting, on alcohol, cocaine, and there's probably more people have quit that way than going to 12 steps or any kind of treatment. And faith may be part of it, but it's probably more related to what are the consequences that finally reach a point where you think, well, I got to drop this. And they do. There's a good book called Sober for Good by Ann Fletcher. She surveyed hundreds of people that resolved alcohol problems through all different kinds of pathways, including 12 steps, but also people that did it on their own and people that did it all kinds of other treatment ways. And if I have somebody who says, well, I don't think the 12 steps is going to work with me, so I don't think there's any chance of me getting any help, then I say, take a look at this book, and they go, oh, there's a guy in chapter 8 that's kind of, he did it this way. And so I think there's so many different pathways that people that say there's only one pathway, and that's part of the problem with some of the 12-step community. They say, this is the only way, and if you're not in it, you're out.
And I think that's because it's too much like conservative Christianity.
Yeah.
Which is its roots. It's
Conservative Christianity.
Well, I'm sorry, I just wanted to say, it's exclusivistic like conservative religion, because that's where it got its roots from. Sorry.
Could I?
Yeah.
I just want to comment about the 12-step process. I work at the treatment center, addiction treatment center, and a lot of the guys I run into that I work with have opinions about the 12-step process. Maybe they've gone through it, something like sour taste in their mouth from it. Although, as I noted here, people are able to derive usefulness from it despite negative experiences if they're allowed to change the context of their understanding of what the value of the 12-step process can be, such as building a first community after stopping drinking or using. It can be extremely useful. And the other comment I want to make was if you take a survey of 12-step meetings, they're extremely diverse across the country.
He did say that was one of the myths, that they were all the same.
They'll find different supports in different meetings.
Well, that's a point that in the presentation when we showed where the social dynamics are different, because in observing these meetings, it was very typical when I'd introduce myself, my name is Scott, I'm a researcher, I'm interested in learning more about AA, and these were open meetings. Invariably what would happen is in that meeting you'd hear them saying, AA is the same wherever you go. But then invariably, at the end of the meeting, someone would come up to me and say, if you want to know a really good meeting, I'll take you to it. Yeah. And so you're suddenly going, wait, this doesn't make sense.
Right.
So Scott, did you say, I missed that, during your presentation, looking at the data, you wouldn't recommend a family member go to AA? Is that what you said?
No, I didn't say that. I mean, I think, I encourage, I would say something, I'd go out, I'll walk the plank here, and say that I think it's unethical for a clinician to refer people to AA and not to have at least attended some AA themselves. I think one has to know, because meetings are quite different. Clearly, a clinician will say something to be effective. It's important that you sample different AA meetings before you decide whether it is something you want to attend or not. But in so doing, in communities, generally there's a limited number of major meetings that people will likely gravitate to. I think clinicians should sit in those meetings, if they're open meetings, and attend them and see what the dynamics are. Not that they should get into client AA matching
Do
sort
we
of
need to
thing.
go to 90 in 90 days, or 60 in 90 days?
60 and 90.
Okay.
But,
I thought you were going to say, I think it's unethical for a provider to recommend that somebody go to AA or 12-step thing without describing different points of view and different approaches that they might consider. I mean, of all the things people call it the disease or the medical model, but informed consent's a fundamental aspect of medical treatment, where you alert people to the range of possible approaches they may take, and then you allow them to select one.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think Keith Humphrey did some very good work that therapists were less likely to recommend AA to clients who describe spiritual religious values not being as important to them. But I think, clinicians have the obligation to say there are options available to you. The difficulty is we can talk about this theoretically, but those options, while they're there, are often not available in the community. Women for sobriety, rational recovery, they exist, but in such lower frequency and such less access to them that.
Well, I think what you might suggest is that training require individual practitioners to be familiar with a number of approaches so that they have the capacity to respond to a...
I think it's very reasonable.
Well, what about the local courts, these mandatory assignments of AA? They require it. You must do this as part of the condition of staying out of jail.
Right. Well, it has been judged unconstitutional to mandate AA attendance.
For a court to mandate.
But by the same token, the court turned around and levied a $1 fine for it. So it was really kind of a mixed message. Because they did judge it to be religious.
Your 5 points really made AA sound pretty religious. What was the first two?
Well, and this is where we get into the religious to spiritual.
What were the first two dimensions?
God, belief in a transcendental power, and a personal relationship with this power. Now, is that religious or is that spiritual?
Yes.
Gosh, that sounds religious to me.
Yeah, it sounds like what we're looking at is there's at least two things. One is there's got to be a motivation, and then second, there's got to be some kind of mechanism and technology for the person to recover. Is that fair to say in all of these things, that those two requirements, and that religion or your children might be the meaning, but you're still going to have an effective mechanism to help you make that change?
Do you think that's true in all of these cases of self-cure?
There's some mechanism. I mean, I don't know what that mechanism is. And
Could be very idiosyncratic, do you think?
But you might find some common, there's 4 or 5 common pathways. Even
Yeah, I think there's common mechanisms. Self-efficacy.
What about,
I have the power to do this, I can do this.
you were
Self-talk.
we were talking about the Scrooge factor, the sudden change. Therapeutically, it's very interesting. Maybe if we do a better job of figuring that out, the factors, then we as therapists could be facilitative to those factors. We can't do it with a client, but maybe we can enhance it. Maybe we can intensify the process so that can actually get played out. I think that's really important work.
I think one thing that happens in AA, they say it's a higher power, but it doesn't have to be God. It could be the doorknob. So as long as it's not your ego. So there seems to be a common message in the mindfulness saying addiction is ego attachment. It's craving and aversion. That's what's running the whole show, and reinforcement. And so the AA is saying, don't try and do it yourself, because you're going to get caught in the same trap.
And how do you interpret the bottom line on motivational interviewing being self-efficacy in regards to what you just said? And when they do those charts of interventions in motivational interviewing, kind of the thing they emphasize is, and what Scott just said, self-efficacy, is that consistent with
Well,
that? Or how does
self-efficacy
it?
is a little bit different than ego attachment. There's more some sort of sense of confidence that under the right circumstances you could be successful in changing.
Right, with a group of people, I can be more successful at overcoming excessive drinking or living a more productive life, which really is what AA is all about. It's not so much about not drinking, it's more about living a more effective life. If you look into the 12 steps. But self-efficacy, on my own, I have low self-efficacy. I have very little confidence that I can live a more successful life.
So
with the group, I
would it be wrong to come into a treatment center and to bombard somebody with this statement? Would this be a wrong thing to say to somebody in treatment? You think that you can overcome addiction on yourself. You're deluded. That's impossible. You need to give up that option. Would that be a good message, a bad message, or inappropriate for some, inappropriate for others?
If it's true, it is a good message. If it's not true, then it's not. But these people know, they have long history of trying unsuccessfully to control their drinking, and whatever they have tried has failed. So there is something called perseverance, and sometimes it can be dysfunctional. Trying the wrong thing over and over again, the wrong thing over and over again, and hoping, talk about unrealistic optimism, hoping that one day the wrong thing will work.
The mechanisms described for making a difference, are they not really, what we're all saying, individualized based on the map of that individual, I think is referred to? Some people have a belief structure that the peer group will influence it. Some people believe they have individual power. Some people believe it's God's power. Some people do it because they're at their edge, because they see the consequences. They all have consequences that start the process of motivation. But then the actual system of integration or change can be as varied as our human beings. And the argument that one system is the system is insane. The value of AA is that it's available everywhere. And it's being promoted so strongly, so there's a support group.
Can I respond to that?
Sure.
And Gary, I know some of our speakers have to.
No, this is a 30-second response. That, in a way, is a good claim, but thinking from a meta perspective, this whole idea of map making, the hugeness of that, what a person has to go through is this idea, all my maps, all what I've tried to work out have not worked. And that's when you really hit the sense of being at rock bottom, or nothing that you've done has worked. That's when your ego strategies have actually worn out. So there's a quantum shift that can happen when all your map making has failed you. And then all of a sudden, that can be a surrender and a grace experience right there.
I agree with you 1,007. It's not the only way.
It's not the only way, but I want to make sure, though.
I would side with Dr. Peel in this from the standpoint, I've been with 3 million people in this area specifically. So I have a large base in 80 countries. On every spiritual base you can imagine. What I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt is the process of finding the drive is related to consequence almost always. Some people have consequences in the future they anticipate. Some people are actually experiencing consequences. But the actual transformational process can occur in the way you're describing, which is the classical way. I agree with you 1,000%. The ego gets smashed, the maps disappear, and I surrender to higher power. But there are also a massive number of variety of other ways that this is done every single day. I think that the illusion is that there is one systematic approach is really, we could debate this for the rest of our lives and waste all of our time. What really would be probably most interesting is to see what are the factors that are most common in that success. I would argue to you one of those is identity, because one's core belief about who one is shapes things. So that's why the concept of disease is so difficult, because once I have a disease, it's very hard for me to shake is who I am. And that's why, as you said in your statistics, as I understood, that AA will cause someone to have a longer period of time before that first grade, but when they go, it's a more severe number of things because the belief structure is, holy shit, I've lost control, this is my disease has control of me. So maybe the shifting of identity, or at least the understanding of the identity of the individual you're working with is important in terms of recommending a course of action.
But is this all right here? Is this right here between you and I, or is this a movement into ego transcendence? Or is this just a reworking of identity? What you're saying right now?
Well, that would be a description of your mind. The real question is what's happening inside you viscerally. We can have any kind of positioning by conversation that you want.
Sure.
And make it ego position and make it sound spiritual.
Yeah.
The real experience is what's happening to you physiologically, emotionally, kinetically, and you that you cannot lie to yourself about.
And that's in your opinion.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and also maybe not only who am I, but how I
Quick
feel.
question before you close. Can I ask one quick question? I just wonder, if we don't send people to 12-step programs, where do you send them? I'm from Ontario, and in Ontario right now, we have a drastic lack of professional people at doing counseling. We have people doing counseling that have completed the Myers-Briggs scale, okay? So, I kid you not. So where do we send people if we don't send them?
If you don't consider them to be bona fide alcoholics, you can send them to various internet websites. Drinkerscheckup.com is for, it's an online brief motivational interviewing done online for people who are problem drinkers, but not necessarily bona fide alcoholics. So the internet is one place to send them.
Okay, well, I'm going to thank our guests.